Hello, I'm Ben Jones. Welcome once again to Dukascopy TV. Russia and Egypt are discussing a potential free trade agreement. It won't be finalised until after Egypt's election, scheduled for later this year. Joining me on the line to discuss why this is being proposed now is Edward Coughlan from Business Monitor International. So Edward, the free trade agreement was something that had been discussed before 2011, but it was stopped as political tensions began to rise in Egypt. Now Egypt and Russia are wanting to resume talks. To what extent do you think the threat of sanctions from the US and the EU impacted on this decision?
I don't think it's had much of an impact, the threat of sanctions coming from the West on Russia. I think it's a lot more to do with the situation within Egypt. Egypt has had a lot of political pressure over the last few months, given overthrow of an elected government and crackdown on the opposition. So Egypt itself is looking to diversify. The US cut a lot of its aid to Egypt. Only part of that has been reinstated. And so Egypt is looking for other countries around the world and within the region that could supplant the US as sort of a supporter of its ambitions. Now, Moscow itself is also probably trying to look to expand its influence. They've obviously lost a lot of support within the Middle East. Their main partner within the Middle East is Syria, which is now consumed by civil war. Egypt is the sort of centerpiece of the region, as well as the largest population and one of the biggest economies, is an obvious target. So they're kind of natural bedfellows at the moment. I don't think sanctions have really pushed them together. It's more dynamics within the rest of the Middle East.
Now, do you think that Egypt and other nations could start to benefit if further sanctions were put in place? Will Russia simply try and transition a fair amount of their trade exports to other nations?
At the moment, I don't think there's going to be any significant sanctions on Russia's main exports, on commodities, particularly metals and oil. There's also little overlap between what Egypt imports and what Russia exports, and vice versa. Egypt is was quite a significant gas exporter. It's also quite big in tourism. There's things in terms of construction and metals, and those do overlap with what Russia exports. We don't think that the West is going to put any punitive sanctions on Russia's commodity exports. However, there is one area where North Africa and Egypt in particular could benefit, and that's in terms of wheat. As I said, I don't think this is going to be subject to sanctions, but in terms of the warming political relations between Egypt and Russia, we could see Russia give preferential trade agreements to Egypt on things like wheat. Egypt imports most of its wheat. It comes from the Black Sea region, especially around Crimea and the rest of Russia. So that's one area that the Middle East could benefit, but generally there's little overlap between the trade dynamics of the two countries.
And finally, how reliant is this deal on the outcome of the election later this year?
I think the outcome of the election is pretty much certain. I don't think it's going to have a significant impact unless we saw a big surprise. The presidential elections are as close enough as you can get to a foregone conclusion. The former defence minister and now Field Marshal Abdel Fattah Sisi will run, and he'll win at presidential elections, most likely by a landslide. I don't see him having any significant competitors in the presidential elections. If there is any opposition to him, it will most likely be expressed in terms of a boycott of the vote. So it's as close as we can get to a definite winner there. Given that, I don't think there's going to be that's going to have any impact on the any potential trade deals. Sisi went to Moscow a couple of months ago. That seems to be where the main impetus lay. So as long as Putin and Sisi is still in charge in 6 months' time, which I see is virtually certain, I don't think there's going to have any sort of political upset which could derail any trade agreement.
Edward, thank you very much for joining us today. That's all we've got time for, I'm afraid. Make sure you tune in again tomorrow, as I'll be covering the all-important ECB rate decision. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.